Welcome to the Podkey Summary of Korn. Today's catch-up is really about one band and a surprisingly big ripple effect. Korn didn't just get huge. They helped define what nu metal sounded like, how it looked, how it reached fans, and even how a heavy band could run itself like a full-on business in the internet era. And the story isn't only riffs and record sales, it's also about trauma turned into songs, constant reinvention, and the weirdly durable fact that a band this heavy ended up shaping mainstream youth culture in the late 90s and beyond. Korn gets widely credited with pioneering and popularizing nu metal. And when you hear the ingredients together, it makes sense. Downtuned 7-string guitars, bass that owes a lot to funk, hip-hop rhythm, murky atmospheric production, and lyrics that went straight into pain, alienation, and all the stuff people usually try very hard not to say out loud. What's interesting is that the band didn't always love the nu metal label. Brian Welch argued it was something outsiders stuck on them, which honestly tracks with how scenes usually get named. Jonathan Davis later took a more practical view of it. His feeling was, if Korn helped invent a major movement, that's worth owning. He's also framed Kornless like a traditional metal band and more like a funk band, which tells you a lot. Their music wasn't built only on heaviness in the classic Judas Priest or Iron Maiden sense. Groove mattered just as much, and sometimes more. The vocals locked into rhythm, the riffs moved with a bounce, and that became a huge part of their identity. Korn's early foundation came from Faith No More and Red Hot Chili Peppers, which helps explain why their music always had this muscular groove underneath the distortion. Then you add Mr. Bungle, and suddenly you get the dissonance, the oddball instincts, the little streak of chaos. Korn basically took those stranger elements and blended them with catchy choruses and groove-heavy metal, which is a pretty unusual recipe when you say it out loud. They even had a recurring harmonic trademark people called the Mr. Bungle chord, basically a flat fifth or tritone. It's one of those details that sounds technical on paper but in practice just gives the music that tense, wrong in a good way feeling. Hip-hop was huge, too. Cypress Hill especially mattered. Davis flat out said that if there's no Cypress Hill, there's no Korn. You can hear that influence in the sampling, the vocal rhythms, and the way songs were structured around feel as much as force. And then there's Steve Vai, whose expressive guitar work and 7-string playing helped inspire Korn's low-end approach. Add aggression and live energy from bands like Sepultura, Prong, Biohazard, and Rage Against the Machine, and you can hear how Korn built something that felt new without coming from nowhere. Their rise wasn't just about making a new sound. Korn were also early and smart about fan connection, especially online, way before every artist had a content team and 3 platforms to maintain. Korn TV documented the making of Follow the Leader, let fans call in, and basically treated the internet like a direct media channel instead of a novelty. That sounds normal now. At the time, it really wasn't. Then Follow the Leader hit #1 on the Billboard 200, sold almost 10 million copies worldwide, and sent Got the Life and Freak on a Leash into heavy MTV rotation. Those videos got so dominant on Total Request Live that they were among the first to be retired from the show. That's a pretty specific kind of late 90s fame. You weren't just popular, you were too popular for the countdown. Korn also turned their identity into a broader youth culture brand. The imagery, the Adidas-associated clothing, the merch, the campaign tour, even showing up on South Park to premiere new music, it all helped make the band feel bigger than the albums themselves. And in that moment, they weren't just succeeding alongside pop culture. They were part of an alternative lane pushing back against the era of Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and Britney Spears. A lot of Korn's emotional power came from how directly they turned private trauma into songs. Daddy dealt with Davis's childhood abuse and the fact that his parents didn't believe him. Kill You drew from experiences involving his stepmother. That kind of writing gave the band a rawness people connected to, but it also meant the music was carrying some very heavy material from the start. This wasn't just attitude or theatrical darkness. A lot of it was lived experience. The band's internal history was rough too. Welch left in 2005 while struggling with methamphetamine addiction. Davis was hospitalized in 2006 with a potentially fatal platelet disorder. Drummer David Silveria eventually left after a long hiatus. Welch's return in 2013 started as a temporary festival appearance and became a permanent reunion, which says a lot about how recovery and changing relationships can reshape a band over time. Later on, Fieldy took a hiatus in 2021 and by 2026 described himself as retired from Korn, while still leaving the door open a crack. For a band with this much history, the lineup has never been a simple static thing. One of the less talked about Korn stories is how often they experimented with the business itself. At one point, Virgin Records paid $25 million up front for a share, not just of albums, but profits from touring, merch, licensing, and ticket sales too. That was an unusually expansive arrangement, and it treated Korn less like a standard signed act and more like a multimedia enterprise, which, for better or worse, became a much more familiar idea later. They also launched Elementary Records to bring newer artists to their audience, including Orgy. And they later moved toward independent label partnerships instead of staying locked into one traditional major label setup forever. Their response to leaks was another early sign of where the industry was heading. Untouchables and Take a Look in the Mirror both got moved forward after unfinished or unauthorized versions showed up online. And they offered an MP3 of Falling Away From Me, even with legal and corporate objections hanging around in the background. That's one of those moments that now feels obvious, but at the time, it was part of a much bigger fight over how music was going to circulate. Korn's numbers are enormous for a heavy band. By 2021, they'd sold more than 40 million records worldwide, put 14 official releases in the Billboard 200 Top 10, and earned 8 Top 5 albums, tying Van Halen for the most top 10 albums among rock or metal artists. But the bigger story is what they unlocked. Their debut album became a template for bands like Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, Cold Chamber, Machine Head, and Sepultura. Even producer Ross Robinson's work on that first record helped launch a career that shaped several defining nu metal albums. They also lasted because they kept changing. Acoustic arrangements with The Cure and Amy Lee, EDM collaborations with Skrillex and Excision. That's not the path of a band trying to preserve itself in amber. As of 2026, the band had reportedly written around 40 candidates for a 15th album, though members also suggested touring might take priority just because the catalog is so deep, which is a nice problem to have if you can call decades of expectations a nice problem. Their influence also goes beyond records. The MTV visibility mattered. The fan base has been described as exceptionally loyal, and later artists including Evanescence have cited Korn as formative. That's when you know a band has moved from successful to foundational. So if you zoom out, Korn's story is bigger than one genre label, even if they helped make that label unavoidable. They changed the sound, the emotional tone, the fan relationship, and a chunk of the business model, which is a lot for one band that once argued about what to even call itself. And honestly, that may be the most Korn detail of all. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.